Kodak invented the digital camera, then killed it. That single decision in 1975 cost them everything. A company worth $28 billion, more than Netflix, Tesla, and Spotify combined at the time, reduced to bankruptcy. But what if Steve Sasson had gotten a yes instead of a no? What if Kodak had embraced the future they invented? For nearly a century, Kodak was photography. Founded in 1881 by George Eastman, the company democratized picture-taking with the revolutionary slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." By 1975, they controlled 90% of the American film market and 85% of camera sales. Their Rochester headquarters employed over 100,000 people, making it the fourth largest private employer in America. From the Brownie camera that cost just $1 in 1900 to Kodachrome color film that defined professional photography for decades, Kodak didn't just sell cameras. They created the entire visual culture of the 20th century. The numbers were staggering. Kodak's film business generated profit margins of 70%, higher than any tech company today. Every roll of film sold for $2 cost just 20 cents to manufacture. Every photo processed in their labs generated pure profit. They had built the perfect business model: sell the camera cheap, make money forever on film and processing. It was the razor and blade strategy decades before anyone called it that. Their research and development budget exceeded $400 million annually, more than most companies' entire revenue. They owned over 1,000 patents in imaging technology and had research labs in 7 countries. This wasn't just a successful company. It was a global empire built on silver halide crystals and chemical processing. But everything was about to change because of one 25-year-old engineer and a question that would haunt corporate America forever. December 1975. Steve Sasson, a recent engineering graduate from Rensselaer Polytechnic, was working in Kodak's Applied Research Lab when his supervisor, Gareth Lloyd, gave him an unusual assignment. Take this new thing called a charge-coupled device, a CCD chip, and see if you can build something useful with it. Lloyd expected maybe a better film scanner. Sasson had a different idea entirely. For 8 months, Sasson worked in secret. He cannibalized parts from a Motorola digital cassette recorder, a television lens from a Super 8 camera, and 16 nickel-cadmium batteries. The result was a toaster-sized contraption that weighed 8 pounds and captured images at a resolution of 0.01 megapixels, 10,000 times worse than your phone today. But it worked. On December 15, 1975, Steve Sasson took the world's first digital photograph. The photograph was terrible. A grainy black and white image of a lab technician that took 23 seconds to record and another 23 seconds to display on a television screen. But Sasson knew what he had built. He demonstrated the prototype to Kodak executives, explaining how digital photography would eventually replace film entirely. Their response was immediate and unanimous. No. The image quality was poor, the device was expensive to manufacture, and most importantly, it would destroy their film business. The prototype was shelved. And that decision would cost them everything they had built over 94 years. While Kodak buried their invention, the world moved forward without them. Canon released their first electronic camera in 1984. Sony launched the Mavica in 1985. By 1990, digital imaging had become a $5 billion industry, and Kodak wasn't even a meaningful player despite inventing the core technology 15 years earlier. Fujifilm, their direct competitor in film, began investing heavily in digital sensors and image processing software. Even Polaroid, famous for instant film, started developing digital instant cameras by 1989. The entire photography industry was pivoting, except for its former leader. But if Kodak had said yes in 1975, they would have owned the digital revolution. With their massive research budget, over $400 million annually, they could have refined Sasson's prototype into a consumer product by 1980. Their global distribution network of 150,000 retail partners would have given them instant market access that Sony and Canon spent decades building. More importantly, their brand meant trust. When consumers thought photography, they thought Kodak. A digital camera with the Kodak name in 1980 would have been the iPhone moment of photography, 27 years before Apple even entered the market. They had the technology, the money, the distribution, and the brand recognition. Everything except the vision. Instead, Kodak spent the next 20 years protecting a dying business. They did eventually enter digital cameras in 2001 with their Easy Share line, but by then, Canon controlled 35% of the market and Sony controlled 22%. Kodak was fighting for scraps of a market they could have owned entirely. Their Easy Share cameras were actually well-designed and user-friendly, but it was too late. The market had already decided who the digital photography leaders were, and Kodak wasn't among them. By 2005, digital camera sales exceeded film camera sales for the first time in history. Kodak's response? They doubled down on film processing and tried to squeeze more profit from a shrinking market. A Kodak digital camera launched in 1980 would have changed everything. Photography was still expensive and complicated. Exactly the problem Kodak had solved with film cameras 80 years earlier. Digital would have been their next, you press the button, we do the rest moment. By 1990, they could have controlled 60% of a market that reached $22 billion by 2005. Instead of fighting the smartphone revolution that began with the iPhone in 2007, Kodak could have been leading it. Their digital expertise combined with their consumer electronics partnerships could have made them a key supplier to Apple, Samsung, and Google. Every smartphone camera could have had Kodak technology inside. They wouldn't just have survived the digital transition, they would have defined it. The actual numbers tell a devastating story. Kodak's revenue peaked at $13 billion in 2003, then collapsed. By 2011, they were generating just $6 billion in revenue, less than half their peak. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with $6.75 billion in debt. The company that once employed 140,000 people worldwide was reduced to fewer than 20,000. Their stock, which traded at $37 in 2014, fell to under 50 cents. 94 years of innovation, patents, and market leadership erased by one decision in 1975. And the number that proves how much they lost is staggering. Canon's camera division alone generated $9.8 billion in revenue in 2019. Sony's imaging division, $8.1 billion. Combined, that's $18 billion annually, from a market Kodak invented but never captured. Over the 30 years since 1990, the digital imaging market has generated over $400 billion in total revenue. Kodak's share? Less than 2%. The lesson isn't about technology. It's about the most expensive mistake in business history: protecting yesterday's profits instead of investing in tomorrow's possibilities. Kodak had everything: the technology, the brand, the distribution, the capital. They had a 15-year head start on every competitor. But they chose certainty over uncertainty, the known over the unknown. They optimized for quarterly earnings instead of long-term survival. In business, the greatest risk isn't taking a chance on the future. It's betting everything on the past. Kodak proved that market leadership means nothing if you're leading in the wrong direction. Every industry has its Steve Sasson moment, that engineer, that prototype, that meeting where the future gets decided. The question isn't whether disruption is coming, it's whether you'll be the one doing the disrupting or the one getting disrupted. Because somewhere right now, in a lab or garage or basement, someone is building the thing that will make your industry obsolete. The only question is, when they knock on your door, will you say yes or no?